Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm here with Matt Dietrich and Annabelle Ramirez Dietrich from the Apollo Chamber Players, and also Marty Regan, composer, and Connor Walsh, dancer, choreographer. And we're talking about the second of Apollo's 20 by 2020 commissions. And the composer of the second of the 20 commissions is Marty Regan. And the piece is titled Splash of Indigo. Matt, how did you, Apollo, come to get hooked up with Marty?
Well, as viewers will have seen in the first episode of our series here, our commission by Libby Larson was the one that launched this project. So we had some meetings after this, and we were trying to figure out, we had a whole 19 other commissions and composers to seek out as we continued the commission. This one in particular came about because of our cellist, Matthew Dudzik. His wife is also a cellist, and she happens to be Japanese. So she had a connection with, I think, Marty Regan, the composer, from a few years before that, where she played a cello work by Marty. And so, this was the instance where I said, okay, well, let's contact Marty, see if he might be interested in composing Apollo, the next commission of the project. We had all been sort of interested with traditional Japanese music, traditional folk music of Japan, also known as Hogaku, I believe, and how other Western classical composers were inspired by this genre of folk music, Eastern music. So we thought maybe we could figure out a way to present an idea to Marty where he could connect Japanese folk music and French Impressionist music.
Well, Marty, were you able to find or create some commonality between those two?
Well, the relationship between Japan and France can be traced back to the 19th century, and we can find potential correspondences between the tonal systems in French Impressionism and Japanese pentatonicism. And so in this particular work, I used Japanese pentatonic scales, but also compositional techniques that is found in the French Impressionists.
And where does the title come from, Splash of Indigo?
So in the summer of 2014, I was in Japan for about 2 months, and 2 or 3 weeks of that time, I was actually studying indigo design and resist dyeing techniques in a town outside of Tokyo called Fujino. And while I was there, I learned how to make scarves and other types of textiles using natural indigo dye. I actually lived with the designer and the teacher on his farm, and we actually harvested silk from silkworms that lived there. And the process of making indigo involves saturating pieces of fabric in a vat, often 10 or more times, which is necessary to achieve the dark, rich colors that indigo is famous for, and then slowly removing them and then twisting and wringing them to remove the excess indigo. And this results often in the indigo gently splashing back down into the vat. And so during the time that I was immersed in this workshop, I began thinking about this work that I would compose for the Apollo Chamber Players. And this splashing became one of the most distinct stages of the process for me, mainly because the workshop was held in a meditative and quiet rural environment. And so that was the only sound that I could hear for miles and miles, the splashing of this indigo into the vat as I wringed it to try to get deep, rich colors.
Well, Connor Walsh. Connor is one of the principal dancers with the Houston Ballet, longtime principal dancer. Connor, what was your impression on first hearing Splash of Indigo? Your impression about how you could choreograph this piece?
Well, I've always had a tremendous amount of interest as a choreographer to work with a quartet, first of all, so that was always really interesting to me. Additionally, I've been to Japan many times, so that there's some sort of connection to a culture that I've gotten to connect with and observe and visit many times was also something that excited me about the project. But ultimately, I am in the early stages of this, and it's sort of a new experience for me to try and choreograph in this process, because normally the first thing I would do is take music and go into a studio and sort of see what comes out of my body. And now I'm sort of in a situation where I'm approaching it much, much differently. So I've been spending so much time familiarizing myself with this gorgeous piece of music, and almost using my imagination much more than I normally would, because I'm normally so dependent on my body, you know. This has been a beautiful exercise for me to try and just free my mind on its own a little bit.
It's interesting you talk about how you use your body, and in this situation, in the pandemic, and everybody being confined to their houses, etc. That has perhaps more of an effect on your body than it would on somebody else's, because your body is your profession, isn't it?
It is. I mean, our body is our instrument, right? It's our everything. Our first obstacle is trying to keep it finely tuned as best we can in this space. I try and take our daily classes and our daily rituals as best we can in our space. But it's interesting. It's I'm used to being so exhausted. Part of my existence is being so physically fatigued. And now I kind of don't have that now. I feel like my whole brain and body works a little bit different now that I'm not in a constant state of physical exhaustion. So there's some positives and negatives to that, because I'm used to thinking while I move. I've learned to process and be productive through movement. And when that movement is restricted or confined, I also find that productivity and just my thought process is different. So I try and look at everything as on the brighter side of things, and say this is a great opportunity for me to think and work and operate, or learn to operate in a different way than I have been for most of my life.
Annabelle, Apollo has collaborated with dancers on several occasions. So this is not a new collaboration for you, is it?
That's right, Sinjin. Well, we first had the opportunity to collaborate with the Houston Ballet in a project called Cacti, where the 4 musicians, we were on stage along with the dancers, and it was our first memorized and choreographed for a musician piece of music. But it was so much fun, and we really got to know some of the dancers a little better, and we found that they were great collaborators and such wonderful and friendly artists, that when this happened, the pandemic started, and we decided to move into the virtual festival. We thought, this is a great opportunity to collaborate with some of these wonderful dancers now that they, have the time, because usually everybody's so busy and so occupied with rehearsals and performances. And so I had the chance to collaborate on other video, socially distanced videos with a couple of dancers, but Connor came to mind for this particular piece, and I had no idea that he had been to Japan or anything like this. It was just something about the piece and the way he dances particularly that we just thought, oh, he'll be perfect for this. So it's so strange that now to learn that he's actually been to Japan many times. So
yeah,
but yeah,
we've been listening to the artistry of a few other Houston Ballet dancers that folks will see coming up in episodes that are forthcoming. And it was interesting to kind of have a perspective on which dancer might like which commission, or be latch on to a particular commission. And I hope we guessed correctly with you, Connor.
I adore the piece, so I can say that much, and I'm thrilled to start moving to it. As I mentioned before, I've sort of been sitting with it and living with it, but I really look forward to starting to move with it and film with it.
Well, I want to ask Marty, during the pandemic, the lockdown, how has that affected your own creativity?
Well, as a composer, I spend a lot of time social distancing, even when there's not a pandemic going on. So,
Yeah.
in a strange way, because life has become more simple and a little bit less busy, it's given me opportunities to work on projects that I've been procrastinating for quite some time.
Well, as we have Marty and Connor here, there's nothing better than to listen to that piece of music and to watch Connor and his dance. So here is Splash of Indigo, the second of the Apollo Chamber Players 20 by 2020 commissions. Enjoy.
The musical piece is inspired by Indigo, the Japanese act of dyeing indigo, and I've been to Japan a lot, but haven't had a lot of experience with indigo dyeing. So I went down a rabbit hole on YouTube and learned as much as I could and watched as many videos as I could about dyeing processes, and started to use those processes as just motivation for movement. Ultimately, my main goal was to honor and represent the music as best as I possibly could. So there's three elements. There's the dye, the water, and I found it really interesting that the dye, what actually makes the blue color is a connection with oxygen. So rather than the connection with the dye itself, it's when you pull it out and the connection to oxygen creates that beautiful color. So I just sort of used those ideas to create a physicality, a physical language, and then tried to use that and within a structure for the score itself. But I kind of wanted that circular visual of fabric being washed around within a tank of water, like they do when they do the dyeing. So that's why we filmed at the water wall, kind of trying to create this circular pattern. Could you think about what would it be like to embody oxygen, breathing, breath, slapping against water, being in water, and then how we would kind of create movement from there. Normally a choreographer is choosing their own music more often than not. And that process alone takes endless hours. Right. You know, you're just listening to anything and everything possible. So I've found the task of being given a piece of music sort of a relief. It's a piece that I would choreograph to, but probably not in these circumstances. I think I would maybe have done something more balletic if I was in a normal normal environment, you know what I mean? But I loved that challenge. How can I make this, here's a piece of music, here's your situation. I loved that so many of the obstacles, or I didn't have to waste time thinking about so many other things, you know what I mean? Right. I just had to make it work. And with our phone, I love just trying to make things look as best as we can with our phones or with our living room in sneakers. I love that task, that challenge. But we were dancing in water, we were slipping around, we were completely drenched. Our grips were slipping, we were battling all these obstacles that you can kind of hide within film, which is great. I find it really important to have motivation for something, and it's difficult as a dancer to not know when our next performance is, and that uncertainty there to kind of stay motivated and stay dancing. So to have any project, but this one in particular, to work on and really focus on and create and to work together and to share this experience together is really special. But I just love being busy. I loved that feeling, that pressure to make something and to that challenge. So I love the motivation and I need that, and I just think as a dancer right now it's so important that we keep making things, because even our work environment as a whole is completely challenged. Just getting back into the studio is a challenge. So it's a great exercise for us to learn how to make things in a different way, and and remind people how wonderful dance is. Even though watching it on film is not the same, it has its own pleasures and joys.
That was Splash of Indigo, performed by the Apollo Chamber Players, the second of their 20x2020 commissions, written by Marty Regan. And we're joined by Marty and also the four members of the Apollo Chamber Players. Marty, how did you come to be involved in the dyeing workshop?
I've been interested in various forms of Japanese cultural expression for over 20 years. First starting, of course, in my interest in Japanese music and in my passion for composing for Japanese instruments. But, well, I'm an aspiring painter, actually. And I love the visual arts. And one of the things that I wanted to learn about was about Japanese indigo, which is a rich tradition. And so I found myself having some free time after working in Japan in 2014. So I Googled and I looked for a workshop in Japan, and I found it.
And what are these special considerations when you are using indigo as a dye? Are there particular things that you have to take into consideration, like wearing gloves, for example?
Yes, you have to wear gloves. It stains very easily, and don't wear any clothes that you ever want to use again. Be sure to get some on your clothes. That's the main rule.
Do you have any evidence that you actually did this workshop, Marty?
Yes, I have some photos.
Aha.
Would you like me to share them?
Absolutely.
Please, let's show our viewers.
Okay. So here I am on the left, as you can see, wearing clothes that I never wore again, with a good, strong pair of gloves and an apron. And in my right hand is an actual piece of silk that I put into the vat, which is behind. Can you see the vat behind me?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's the actual vat, which is full with the indigo. And in order to get deep, rich colors to saturate the fabric, you need to dip it in there at least 10 times. And so that, that causes, when you wring it out, this, the very subtle splash sounds. So that's where the inspiration for the piece came from. And what you see in your right hand actually became the scarf that you see in the upper right hand corner. But you can also, for example, use sewing in the top left photograph. The top right, you use multiple layers. The bottom left, again, is using a piece of rope. And then you can use boards and clamps in the bottom right. So there are various techniques. And depending on what type of technique you use, you can get different patterns.
Wow.
But as you can see, it's an art form that, it's limited only by your imagination.
Let me ask the musicians, how are there very visible, well, invisible is not the right word, stuff that you can hear, elements of that you can identify as Japanese or French within the music?
I think probably the pentatonic scale is one of the most immediately recognizable sound features that you'll hear throughout, which is, I think very prominent in Japanese music and in East Asian music, probably much of Asian music. But the other really interesting thing is that, Marty has a lot of experience composing for traditional Japanese instruments. Of course, this piece is for string quartet. So there are moments where the writing mimics some of the sounds that you might get from the shakuhachi, or the Japanese, inverted flute. And there's an extended solo for the viola, which sounds an awful lot like a solo writing for shakuhachi. But there are also these moments where he writes these really dramatic crescendos, which sound a lot like the velocity of air leaving a flute. And so I think the listener is immediately drawn to maybe some of those elements as well.
Shakuhachi.
Yes.
Marty, do you have one to hand that you can show us? The shakuhachi? Oh, well, look, as if by magic.
Exactly.
This seems like it would be an instrument that goes back many, many centuries in Japan.
Yes, it was originally imported from China in the 7th century, along with a type of aristocratic court music known as gagaku, and then fell out of Japan's musical landscape for about 500 years until it reappeared in the hands of these mendicant monks known as komuso, who used the instrument not as a musical tool, but as a tool for ascetic practice. And so the repertoire that developed within this historical context in the hands of these monks are known as honkyoku, and they're literally sonic meditations that are intended to aid in their ascetic and spiritual practice.
Can you give us an example of how the shakuhachi sounds?
Sure, absolutely.
That's wonderful. Whitney, does that sound like your viola?
Well, I was definitely listened to shakuhachi so that I could try to emulate that. But I remember Marty telling me that when he was taking some shakuhachi lessons, the teacher said that any introduction of vibrato into the sound is the ego coming in
That's
to your
right.
playing. Yeah, do you remember that? And so I think of that every time. I don't think it means ego as in like, oh my, I'm just the world's most amazing, violist, and not that, but like I understood what he meant then. And so, but there has to be a purity of sound, and again, like that expression, but without the vibrato added to it.
For our viewers who may not know what vibrato is, it's basically just the oscillation of a certain pitch. But actually, I have a question for Marty. So the ornamentation aspect of shakuhachi playing, which is also manifested in Splash of Indigo in our playing in some of our melodic lines, I guess that's not part of one's ego, is it?
No, I mean, you want to try to get as pure sound as possible, and to avoid any allusion to vibrato, which is, I suppose, from the point of view of Japanese aesthetic, a kind of, a Western classical music aesthetic. And so without vibrato, what else can you do to make music interesting? Well, you have crescendo and diminuendos, which of course is used extensively in this piece and in traditional shakuhachi music. And you also do have ornamentation. One of the things that you find with a lot of shakuhachi music is that the beginning is often ornamented, and often the end as well. These little kind of twists and turns right at the end as the sound is fading out. And so the viola solo that starts off the beginning of the slow middle section, it's very short, but it really kind of encompasses the core material of this piece.
Well, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. So, Annabelle, what is this piece like to play?
What is it like to play? It's a joy, actually. There's many different layers, I think, many different moods. You get a sense of traveling to Paris, and you get a sense of going off to Japan in the same piece, and also traveling back in time to the 20s or something like that. To me, it seems like, and also just the middle section, the calm and the meditative part of that aspect is really interesting. But And one thing I never really knew about the indigo dyeing was the splashing of this. Now that Marty has mentioned that, I think a lot about how the undulating passages are really reminiscent of that movement, and so how there's a lot of undulating passages in the piece, and that's where that came from. So it's really nice to know that, you know, what you sense when you're playing the piece is actually something that Marty was trying to portray. So we're not wrong in that feeling. So yeah, it's great.
May I add something to that?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
The term splash, in particular, in the title, refers to the energetic character and sometimes unpredictable, improvisatory, and fluid nature of the music. So I'm very happy to hear, as a performer, that you noticed that, because that was definitely intentional.
And it has a good part for the viola, Whitney.
It does have a good part for the viola, but it's just a gorgeous work of music to perform, and audiences really respond to it as well. I mean, there's just, I know that we've been using all of these metaphors, you know, splashing and all of this stuff, but it really is, you're kind of washed over in the sound of the quartet, and it just, there is that undulation and everything, and it does. Thank you, Marty. It has a great viola part, and every part is great in the work, and we love performing Splash of Indigo.
And, you know, like you said, Whitney, audiences really do respond to this piece.
Yeah.
This is one of our commissions that we program often when we do touring concerts around the country, and it always gets a really wonderful response. And, you know, one of the things I hope that has come through with this 20 by 2020 project, and, you know, viewers will see in the next 18 episodes after this, that and experiencing the commissions and hearing from the composers, is that new music is very accessible, and it reflects, you know, the times in which we live, and the feelings and predilections of the composers that write them. And it's not something, you know, music is not something that's dead and that people can't connect to in our day and age. So I hope that's something that comes through loud and clear as we continue these.
I think it's extraordinary what you've done with this 20 by 2020 project, and I've been privileged to be a part of it. And it's been wonderful to see the pieces as they develop. I've gone to a number of Apollo Chamber Players concerts over the years and heard commissions that have come after mine. I'm very honored to be a part of this collection, and I think the contributions that you're making to Houston and to chamber music throughout the country is just extraordinary. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marty.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marty, for creating this piece. Stay safe there in Long Island. Wear your mask when you go outside. And thank you as well to the members of the Apollo Chamber Players, Matt, Annabelle, Whitney, and Matthew. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
you.